A big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video, but more on that later.
Should we go for a little walk? All right, so upstate New York is currently in a little bit of a drought, which means this is the perfect time to talk about our spring development project. And it's also a really, really good time to start developing new springs. I've developed, I think, 6 springs so far on our homestead, and we can go check right now, but I'm pretty sure 5 of the 6 springs have dried up. The only spring that's still running is the very first spring I developed with our friend Noah. I can't remember exactly when I did it, but it's still my favorite spring. It was built mostly out of rock, and it's just a really beautiful location. And it's the water we've been drinking for a long time now. Stop.
9.3 seconds.
9 seconds.
To fill half a gallon.
Yeah, I've learned a ton of new things about spring development that I wanted to share, because it's one of those topics that I feel like there's actually not that much good information on the internet. It kind of blows my mind that we have some of the most viewed spring videos online, even though I'm not an expert in spring development. These are basically just the very first springs I've ever developed. And yeah, it's weird like that. So I made friends with the 84-year-old bulldozer operator who's been clearing our house site, and he has a ton of knowledge about spring development that he shared with me. And then I also made friends with a young guy who's an excavator operator who's developed a couple springs commercially for local dairy operations. So between the two of them, I've actually learned a lot of real world knowledge about spring development. We also have a friend, and he sent me these LiDAR scans of our entire mountain that show where all of the water is. It's honestly kind of amazing. And the really cool thing is that I've found all of the water already. I found it without the scans, and I use the scans to confirm everything, but it does show that there really isn't any water above our house site. The really good water sources are lower in elevation. So yeah, we're gonna have to figure out a way to get the water up the hill, either with a ram pump or with some sort of solar powered transfer pump. Honestly, the pump isn't the most important part of the equation. What we really wanna find is the highest source of spring water in terms of elevation with the most flow. So as of right now, that's still the very first spring I developed. But we're arriving right now in a little valley, basically between 2 mountaintops. And the LiDAR scans for our mountain show that this area has a lot of water. So as you can see, this area is really, really green. And if you were to dig anywhere here, you would hit water. But I'm not sure how concentrated the flow is, which is why I haven't dug in this area. When we first moved here, I set up a bunch of different trail cameras because this is a really easy place to find animals because they come and drink the water.
Closing up shop, closing up my store. I know this city doesn't need me no more. And I know it ain't no mystery. I'm going on back to Bear Country.
So the excavator operator I talked to said that if I dig right in this area, I'll probably hit water. I would have to do it with a large machine, not by hand with an excavator, because there's water about 200 feet down that direction. And he said what you want to do is you want to find the water that's flowing out of the ground, and then you want to dig above it so that you can dig deep down through the hard pan, like maybe 6 feet down. And this way, the soil above the spring protects your spring from contamination. So instead of doing the whole tarp method like I did on my first 6 spring developments, you use the layout of the ground to do that work for you. This type of area, he said, is also really good for spring development because it's not a valley, it's a hillside. So in the rainy season, when water is flowing all down these hills, there's not going to be a ton of water flowing over the ground above your spring, which you really don't want. For example, if I dug down there in that other green area, that really is a valley. So even though there is spring water there, you end up with a lot of rainwater also flowing through that area, which is why I've never dug there before, because it would be impossible to waterproof a spring that's in a valley like that. So this right here is the very first spring we ever developed. The water flows from under that rock right there. And this is the only spring that's still flowing on our land a lot. There's 5 other springs up there, and some of them flow a little bit, but none of them flow as well as this one. And I actually brought the 84-year-old man right here to take a look at these springs and tell me what he thought. And he said that any water we have flowing right now is a really, really good spring because most of the springs in this area have dried up because of the drought. And the other springs I developed, he called those wet weather springs, which means they flow when it rains, but they don't flow in a drought. I was kind of wondering what the point of having a wet weather spring is, but he said that a lot of ponds actually use wet weather springs because the pond level can sustain itself through dry periods and then refill during the rainy season. Hi, Freya. So I feel like if you're not relying on the spring for drinking water, then a wet weather spring is totally fine. And we seem to have, I guess, 4 or 5 wet weather springs that produce a ton of water in the rainy season. I mean, the 3 upper springs I developed, which I originally thought would be our very best springs, those ones are really just wet weather springs. But I talked to the old man about them, and he said that I might have just not dug deep enough into the ground. I could bring the excavator we now own into that area and dig down an additional 6 feet or so, and I might find substantially more water. So that's going to be my plan. He said that the next couple weeks are really the best weeks of the entire year for spring development because the water you find is basically gold. It's really, really reliable. The fact that this spring right here is still flowing means that this is the kind of spring you could use for a house because you know that it's going to be flowing for decades and decades. So if you look right here, I staked out what I thought could be another spring, which I missed right here, which means that digging in this area could yield substantially more water. You see there's still water flowing right there, which is super rare for our land right now. So that's a really, really good sign. And then if you come over here, you can see there's still water flowing over the surface of the ground right here. So this is also a really, really good spring. And I asked him exactly where to dig in this area because when I was doing it by hand, I basically just dug down and followed the water, which is a totally fine way to do it if you're digging everything by hand. But if you have heavy machinery or you want to dig a lot, it would be way better to dig right there down. And this way you can try and intersect the water that's flowing under the ground and hit it like 6 feet down. He thought this whole area right here is ledge, and I would only be able to dig at the most like 10 feet down before I hit solid bedrock. So as of right now, this is the highest elevation spring. I think it's 1,800 feet above sea level, but I want to take you now to the best springs on our property, which I don't think I've ever even showed in a video. They're substantially lower in elevation and also quite a lot further from a future house site, which is why I've never taken the time to develop them. But we can go check them out right now, because if those springs are flowing a lot, it might be worth changing my entire spring development plan and developing them instead. Because if I use a ram pump, elevation is really important, like figuring out how high you have to pump the water. But the other extremely important part of a ram pump is flow. You need a lot of flow to be able to pump water uphill without electricity. I should rephrase that. You need a lot of flow if you want to pump water uphill without electricity in the winter without things freezing, because you want it to be flowing constantly through the pump so that the pump doesn't freeze. They have systems for ram pumps. If you don't have enough flow, you can do like a float valve tank type system where the tank will fill up with water and then dump it into the ram pump. And that's, I think, the workaround if you don't have a lot of flow and you want to get water uphill. So this right here is our current flow rate. As you can see, it's substantially less water than we've ever had before. Some people like to filter their spring water. We filter it with the Berkey in the shipping containers, but I also like to just drink it plain. I feel like people kind of freak out about water testing, but ultimately when you're testing the quality of spring water, the test is only going to tell you the quality of the spring water at that exact moment in time, and an hour later that could have changed. Yeah, I think most people do a UV filter for a whole house system, which I'll probably do once we have a house with spring water. But for now, I kind of like to drink it just pure. It definitely is like different than other water. I kind of always thought I didn't actually like drinking water until I started drinking our spring water. I think I just didn't like the taste of chlorine or fluoride or arsenic or all of these other things that are in American tap water. And the spring water just, it feels completely different. It feels like it's like alive, because I know with tap water, you can do a lot of like filtration system with a Berkey or with like reverse osmosis or something like that. But I find when you filter the water like crazy, you end up with kind of this like empty, dead water. It doesn't have all of the really bad contaminants, but it doesn't taste like spring water. This water tastes like a little bit almost like heavy, I would say. It feels like it has like minerals in it. I haven't tested the actual like mineral content of the water. I feel like that would be really fun to do, because I haven't really decided whether or not this spring will be the spring we use for our house drinking water. And once that spring is decided and developed, then I'll test the water like substantially to make sure I like what's in it, because those tests are pretty expensive. So you definitely only want to do that one time. But yeah, we're getting to the other springs now. Let's go take a look. So we've made it to the lower springs. I don't think I've ever shown you these springs before. They are absolutely incredible. This is one of my favorite places on our property. It's just so beautiful. Yeah, it's not a huge area, but it's really hard to find springs when the leaves are down on the ground. just because you have to be really, really close to the actual water to see it with the trees in the forest and all of that stuff. So yeah, looking at this flow right now, I'm tempted to try and develop these springs. They're substantially lower in elevation. So I don't know if it's a good idea or not, but they have a ton of water. And now that we own an excavator, which is an amazing new development we got for our house build, it kind of changes the way I think about spring development, because the first 6 springs I dug by hand, and even though it's an incredibly fun, challenging job physically, it would be impossible to trench the line up the mountain by hand. You definitely need some sort of heavy machinery for that job. And you can also dig springs with an excavator. I know online some people don't recommend it because you can like break or disturb the spring somehow, but all of the guys I talk to around here who have actually developed springs, they do it with excavators just because it's such a big job. And yeah, that's just what they said. So I kind of trust the people I meet in real life who have actually developed real springs on a personal level for their houses and also on a commercial level. So I feel like the $1 million question is, why not build your house site below the springs, and then you could have gravity fed water? And that's what some of our friends have. It's really, really nice to have it that way. This right here is actually the foundation of an old farmhouse. And when we first moved to this area, I met I think he was like 90-year-old farmer, and he knew the descendants of the family that had originally lived in this house. And it's a really nice setup to have the springs above the house because you're guaranteed to have water year round. But this is a really bad place to build a house if you have other options, because there's no flat land around here. It's all sloped in either direction. And in the spring, when this area starts flooding from huge rainstorms and snow melt, the water level would actually be pretty close to the foundation of this house. There's also so much less sunlight down here. I think you only get like 3 or 4 hours of sunlight a day because you don't get the sunrise and you also don't get the sunset. You only have the in-between hours. So for us living in upstate New York, the most limiting factor, I feel like, isn't water, it's sunlight hours. That's kind of like the key missing ingredient. We have a ton of cloudy days. We have a pretty long winter. And if you want to have any chance of running solar in that kind of a setup, then you need to position your house and your solar field in the area with the absolute most sunlight hours on the mountain, which is what we're going to do. So yeah, instead we get to solve the engineering puzzle of getting water uphill. The worst case scenario is that we have to drill a well like everyone else, which would be pretty expensive. And I also don't really like the quality of the well water. Yeah, there's pros and cons to everything. I feel like running water uphill is a bit of a puzzle, but it's definitely solvable. You either solve it with the ram pump or with a different pump, or you give up entirely and drill a well. But we will definitely get it sorted. I'm thinking next week of beginning the process of developing springs with our new excavator. So if you have any suggestions, if I've said anything that seems very, very wrong, or if you have experience developing springs on a commercial level, definitely leave a comment with your advice, because I would like to know that information now before I begin this process. But yeah, it's just incredibly rewarding. I feel like you can't waste your time when you're developing springs because it's all so much fun. And yeah, thank you so much for all your help. And a big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. I put together a quick sign-up page for Dana's upcoming new cookbook project. Squarespace makes the page design process incredibly simple, and I especially like how they automatically organize these pages into categories, so you know exactly who signed up for which product. And you can even automate the email responses so that they go out on a certain timeline. The new layout tools have gotten so seamless and responsive that building pages like this is something I can literally do in minutes, not hours. Best of all, being able to preview how the page will look on mobile devices is key, because it allows you to go back and forth between layouts until you find a good compromise for the widest range of formats, especially since more and more of our traffic these days is mobile. If you'd like to check it out for yourself, head to squarespace.com/wildweroam for a free trial and 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.